Now I said it anyway. Anyway, hey Facebook Live, we've changed the camera angle, so we're going to try something. You can't see it, but you're right by the speaker, and we're hoping that will help with the sound. Plus, having you over here means you're not in the middle of the crowd. There's a huge raucous crowd in the room, so we didn't want you guys to have to be drowned out by the crowd, and so we're going to try this out. Give us feedback. By the way, if you're joining us on Facebook Live. Let us know where you're from. I think I saw my friend Ruben. I know. I was just told not to call people by name, but I think I saw Ruben was watching. Hi, Ruben. And for Naresh, I'll say, hey, boo. And then I'm done talking to the camera. And that's enough of that. So, hi, Facebook. We're going to talk to the room from now on. Anyway, come on and make yourselves at home. Tonight is actually our last class and for the year. And I'm kind of sad about that, but I'm also kind of relieved in the sense we need to catch our breath. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the classes and the various events, and then we'll get right into tonight's material. By the way, we've got guests from California. Is there anyone else from out of state by any chance? So we've got guests from California who just are staying with my friend Lenny, and so they wanted to be here tonight, so welcome to these guys. It's Wayne and Lisa, right?
Correct.
Okay. So anyway, and welcome to you guys. How many of you guys are first-timers? I see lots of new faces, so I'm always excited to see new faces. Good grief, most of you are new faces. It's probably the ones who've been here before that will come in a few minutes late. So good on you guys for getting your seats, and so they'll sit in the couches or something like that. You'll go, what? We could have sat in the couch?
Front row.
Scramble for the couch, quick, get the couch. Anyway, so tonight is the last class of the year. My experience has been that once the holidays kick in, people get busy and it's hard to make a weeknight class. And so from now until January, we're taking the Tuesday nights off. But here's the big news: is come January 10th, I think it is. January 10th, we're going to actually do every Tuesday in 2017. So see, you're sad about the end, but we're going to start teaching every Tuesday. And so I'm hoping that you'll see not just me, but some of our other counselors and perhaps occasionally some guests up here. So anyway, that'll start January 10th. As soon as we know, we'll announce kind of what's the lineup and what we're teaching and what kind of things to expect. And we're still working on the calendar for events. There are no more training events this year here at the Think Differently Center. But let me give the two that are coming up that I want you to know about, just in case either you want to get on an airplane or you've got friends in these areas. Next week, a week from tomorrow, I get on an airplane, I head to South Carolina. Hi, South Carolina, by the way. I said I wasn't going to do that, but hi, South Carolina, Jennifer and all your friends, our friends. They've sent teams here for the last several trainings, and so we've really built a bridge with South Carolina. I'm going to go there and do a 2-day training there with 4610 Ministries, Jennifer Trammell and her team. And then I'll speak at a church in, I'm going to get this wrong, Greenville, South Carolina. Russ Muse and his church, Freedom Church, there in Greenville. And so if you either have friends or you just want to go somewhere closer to the ocean, except you guys, you're probably going closer to the other ocean. But if you just want to do that, we would love to have you at either or both of those places. And so that's coming up just next week. So Friday and Saturday with 4610 Ministries, and then Sunday with Russ Muse at Freedom Church. Hi, Russ. I was told not to do that. God, it's so hard not to say hi to people. Hi, Mimi. Anyway, so that's coming up, and then actually the week of Thanksgiving, some people know this, some people don't. My family is actually in Michigan, and so I always go do Thanksgiving. The last several years I've gone and done Thanksgiving with my family, and got in touch with some friends up there, and there's a couple things happening. One of them is a private event, but I'll speak at West Point Church in Grand Rapids on Sunday it's probably the 20th. Whatever this Sunday is right before Thanksgiving. Hi. Is it the 20th?
Yeah.
And then the 21st, which is a Monday, I'm going to do the Think Differently, Learn Differently seminar on a Monday in Grand Rapids also. If you've been a part of that here, we've done it twice here. I just have to say I've begun writing. Like, people say, how's the third book going? And I'm like, it's all up here. And it's getting better and better the longer it sits up here, but it's time. And once I start writing, it kind of gets the juices going. I got to tell you, I'm super excited about this stuff. If you are a communicator, you will be excited about this book. If you don't have any idea what I'm going to be writing about, follow me on Twitter at Bob Hamp. Sorry. or find me on the Facebook page for this place. I'm sorry, my one Facebook page is about to run out of space because it's got limits, but the Think Differently Center page, if you'll come find us on there, you'll get all the information you need about that. But I post as I write. It's just a weird habit I have. I'm a youngest child who has a little bit of ADD, and so when I have thoughts, it's hard for me not to blurt them out. And so I have lots of thoughts when I sit down to write, and so Twitter becomes my number one blurt place. And then Facebook, because Twitter has limitations, right? Sometimes Twitter has limitations. It's only 140 characters. There are ways around that, but I don't like finding loopholes. That's not really very true. I do like finding loopholes. But in the meantime, so if you keep an eye on those things, I'll be posting as I write. But really the book is about this. For years, as I've taught, what I've discovered is that people change. And I'm not a theologian, and this is going to sound weird to some of you when I say this. I'm not necessarily a pastor. And I don't mean that by profession and title. I'm somewhere between a pastor and a counselor, so I'm a counselor. Or a caster, but that sounds bad somehow. So counselor doesn't sound that great either, especially for the people in the front row. But I'm somewhere in between those things, and so when I communicate, my goal is not to give you information about things, but to help you see things in new ways, and in seeing things in new ways, to help you live in some new ways. Hence, by the way, a book title called Think Differently, Live Differently. So, but the idea is that there's a method of communication or a way of thinking about communication that helps bring about transformation. Education doesn't necessarily bring about transformation. Education brings about an increase in intellect. But transformation comes from a different style of communicating. And so this whole book is about a little bit of brain science, a little bit of counseling, a whole lot of spiritual stuff. But by that I mean in terms of defining what I mean by spiritual, but also about anointing and understanding body, soul, and spirit, and how the spirit connects to other people's spirits in communication. So the book's going to cover some of that stuff. And as I'm putting my outline together, I'm realizing kind of the back part of the book is going to be a lot of just do this, do this, do this, do this. And if you know me at all, I usually steer clear of that. But somehow I'm finding that when it comes to this communication stuff, concepts don't necessarily get it all across. And so I'm going to go from big picture concept down to kind of application and illustration. But the more that I write this, the more I'm like, dang, this is fun. And so, you know how hard it is for me not to say, this is a really good book. So I just said it. That's my way of saying it without saying it. But I think you're going to find out it's a really good book. So anyway, so welcome you guys to Think Differently Center again. I know a bunch of you guys are new here. And so normally we do the first and third Tuesday of every month. We are done for the year and we'll pick up in January. Like I said, we'll do every Tuesday. But we also do a couple of training events. Next year we're going to do our Finding the Created You, which is our version of a freedom event. And what that is it's really about recognizing that Jesus came to rescue the person he created you to be, and kind of walking through what keeps you from being that person, and culminating with asking him to do that. We've seen some really powerful and miraculous things take place both in that and after that. And then we'll also do a training called Expressing the Created You, which is a derivative of Think Differently, Lead Differently. We just didn't want everybody to think, oh, I'm not a leader, I can't come. If you've got the Spirit inside of you, then you are here to breathe the Spirit onto the planet. And so Expressing the Created You is about that. And so it's really about, once you find who you are and God comes and rescues who you are, there's an opportunity for you to really live that out. Sounds so corny to say, live that out loud, but it almost came out of my mouth just spontaneously. It's an opportunity for you to live that out powerfully in such a way that you can change the world around you. So that's Expressing the Created You. I feel sure we're going to do our publishing event again, but it'll look really different. We learned a lot doing our first one. And feel like there's something else that we're going to do. Oh, the Learn Differently, which we've done twice. Once again, that's getting better because I'm getting the material better sequenced, and I'm getting new stuff as I write. That's kind of the way it works. You what is it? You plumb the well, you prime the pump. Thank you. I'm a professional communicator writing about communication. Would you guys help me out with some words tonight? So anyway, let me pray and we'll get started. Tonight's class is Overcoming Life Patterns, and I'll pray and then I'll explain what that's about. We'll dive right in. So Jesus, We are as convinced as can be that you came to set us free. And part of what you came to set us free from is our lack of knowing what we need to be set free from. So would you do both of those things for us every time we gather? Would you open the eyes of our hearts to what we do not see, and then open the eyes of our hearts to see those things the way that you do? Believing then that that kind of truth will set us free, we bring, as best as we know, we bring our minds, our soul, and our bodies into this place and surrender to you and to your breath in here. But we ask that you would do your part and that you would make this room a place of sanctuary and a place of protectedness where you're free to operate and where no other spirit has any authority in this place. God, we turn both soul and spirit towards you to receive. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I am a family therapist by training. I just said a minute ago I'm a counselor, or what did I say? I don't even, a caster. By training, I'm a marriage and family therapist. And so actually, I'm a huge believer when people have asked me about graduate education, when they want to go into counseling. I'm a big believer in family therapy as a model, as a theoretical basis. And one of the main reasons I am is because it's one of the counseling models that's willing to say there's an objective definition of what's healthy and what's not healthy. There are some counseling models that say that, whatever feels right to you is healthy. And well, I think there's some elements of that are helpful. There's some elements of that are dangerous. But family therapy as a discipline, among many other things, is willing to say, hey, there's some stuff that works and there's some stuff that just doesn't work. Let's help people do what works. And not only that, but I think there was, for me, a very helpful beginning of a way of thinking that continued to lead me to think differently and then to talk about and write about thinking differently, that really was birthed for me slightly before my graduate education. But I think my graduate education really kind of amped that up for me in a lot of different ways. But Overcoming Life Patterns for me is a class about, to some degree, it's about the ways that I think about family systems. But more importantly, I try to think about it from your perspective, even though we just met. By your perspective, I mean each person who's saying, what do I wish was different in my life? And so I want to, a lot of times we either realize, God, the same thing keeps happening to me over and over again, or we start to realize in a class like this, wait, this is a pattern. One of the things that I find myself helping people recognize in the counseling room is perhaps the thing they're dealing with isn't a single isolated event, but it might actually be contained in a larger picture, and a larger picture that they have something to do with creating, therefore they have something to do with changing. And so the class tonight on Overcoming Life Patterns is about recognizing some of the bigger picture of the patterns of our life, and hopefully not just recognizing, but gaining some authority in those things through both insight, but also through recognizing that our way of thinking can change about that, helping us to be completely free. So I want to start with two stories. Don't let me forget that I said two stories. So my tendency is to tell a story and then get excited and start teaching. Don't let me get away with just telling one story. So the story that I want to start with goes like this. There was a young man that I knew years ago, and he had struggled much of his early life, and by early life I mean teen years through early 20s, with fairly debilitating depression. Been hospitalized a couple times, variety of different kinds of treatment, and I was starting to learn some things about how Jesus sets us free and how to cooperate with him in that. And we sat down together after he sat through some teaching, which you guys would recognize as the Foundations of Freedom concepts. We sat down together, and listen, I'm not trying to promote that this is always the case, but in a single session he was completely set free from his depression. And what I mean by that is he was in one state of heaviness and overwhelmed and unable to think clearly, just constantly negative thoughts, negative feelings, felt like he was constantly under a dark cloud. Within an hour and a half to 2 hours of time, all of that was gone. He could think differently. He saw himself in a completely different way, and he walked out of there saying, man, I feel like I'm seeing color for the first time. Well, I set up a follow-up time to visit, and I got with him and I said, so how are things going? He's like, man, I'm doing great. The last 2 weeks has been amazing for me. And so we talked a little bit and kind of anchor some of that, and let's not worry about relapse necessarily, but let's talk about what you can become and who you can become. We're talking about that. Another 2 weeks goes by, we get together again. How are you doing? He says, man, I cannot believe, it's like I'm a different person. Week 6, we get together the third time. I said, so how you doing? He goes, oh, it came back again. Now Galatians 5 says, don't become under bondage a second time, unto the bondage that you were under bondage to before. And one of the things that Paul is saying to us is, don't go back under it. But one of the things we don't realize is, when Paul says don't come back under it, he's not saying don't go backwards. He's saying there's another form that comes after once you get free from that, recognize that you've got to walk in such a way that the next kind of bondage doesn't come. And so 6 weeks into it, he looks at me and says, I'm not doing good. And I said, well, let's sit down, let's probe, let's ask a couple questions. And so we asked some questions, and I said, so talk to me about these 6 weeks. And he said, well, I was doing great, called my mom, like right after the first session, I called my mom and I told her, Mom, I'm completely free from depression. And she said, are you sure? Now, isn't that a strange question? Now, keep in mind, I don't think anything ill. And by the way, there are ways that this story is an amalgam of many stories. This is not just a single story, but it's an amalgam of many stories. I learned the word amalgam from the movie Parenthood, by the way, which that's a whole other, it's a brilliant family therapy movie and probably totally inappropriate, but very funny. And so this story is an amalgam of many stories, but he said, I called my mom, and her first question was, are you sure? And now, that may seem like an odd question for you, but what you may not know about his story is, for his 10 years that he had struggled, his number one supporter and number one help was her. And so for years, she learned everything she could about depression, and she learned everything she could about the treatment of depression. She learned everything she could about his depression and his triggers, and she became an expert on his depression. And so when he said, I'm free, she was asking a question based on, she's seen some things before. She said, are you sure? Well, she says, so they have the conversation, and she just ends the conversation saying, hey, just in case you're not free, I'm here for you. You hear it? I wonder what it would mean if he was free. Is she still there for him? Now, none of this was direct conversation. It was just the conversations that are natural to have when you've had 10 years of wrestling with the same pattern. And so week after week, they'd have this conversation and say, Mom, I'm still doing great. And she'd say, you could hear in her questions, well, okay, I'm glad it's still going well. You hear it again, the implication. And they'd end the conversation and she'd say, just in case you're not free, I'm here for you. And at the end of every conversation for 6 weeks, she would say, just in case you're not okay, I'm here for you. Well, he and I sat down and had a very serious conversation. And here's the question I asked him. I said, if you get free again and stay free for the rest of your life, are you willing for your mother to struggle about your freedom? Now, it actually took some convincing for him to say yes to that question. Does that make sense to all of you? Because we end up in what I would call covert agreements, where we kind of agree the things we're going to live our life around and what everybody's role is in that. And if we don't have some recognition of that, our ability to recognize life patterns, much less overcome them, is going to be significantly crippled. And so once I convinced him that he could live free, even if his mother struggled the rest of her life, we went back through and we did a lot of things, and in an hour's time, all the weight lifted, and he went home. And over the next year, he had to have different kinds of conversations with his mom, so that ultimately both of them could be free and not just him. I see enough nods that I don't feel like I need to go into details yet, because this class will be about those details. Let me tell the second story. Look, I remember the second story. I'm so proud of me. Second story actually happened about 10 years ago. I was I had a team of people who were primarily focused on deliverance and getting demons out of folks. And so this one lady in particular had some version of depression / agoraphobia, i.e. she didn't leave her house much, and if she did, it wasn't for long, and she always had kind of an escape plan whenever she did leave her house. And so she comes in, and one of my guys kind of an older veteran of the deliverance kind of mindset, sits down with her and he does a session. He comes to me and says, man, I got a bunch of stuff out of her. She's going to be fine. I said, man, I'm happy to hear that. And about a week later, she called and said, I'm not fine. In fact, I might be worse than I was before. And so my guy from the team, he jumps to his, he grabs his, I'm about to be sarcastic, but I'm not careful. He grabs his coat and heads out of the house, and he goes and he sits down with her, and he goes through the whole thing again, and comes back and says, I got even more this time. I got more stuff out, and she should be fine now. And I said, man, I hope that's the case. So keep me posted. And about another week later, she calls and says, not doing well. And so my guy says, could you meet with us? And so he and I get together and we sit down with her, and I began asking some questions, and I discovered two things right away. Number one, I discovered that she lives with her mother. So she's 35, she lives with her mother, and I discovered that also her daughter lives with her. So it's 3 generations of women in the house. And that's not it's just a description of the house, okay? And so it's a lot of female laughter. And so I sat down with them, and the more I asked her questions, I also discovered that there was a lot of confusion about who would be responsible for who in that house. Like, she's in her 30s, and her mom was doing her laundry, and her young teenage daughter was expecting her to do some things for her that was really her responsibility. And there's a lot of blurring of lines of who was responsible for what. And so what they had was kind of this 3-way dependency among the 3 of them, where they just, all of them waited for everybody else to do something. None of them did anything for themselves. Did you hear me? When part of your life pattern is that you expect other people to do things for yourselves, it's impossible for you to be ultimately free, because part of freedom is you actually being self-initiating. Self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit, right? And so if you are letting others control you, or others' relationships control you, then you never have the opportunity to be free until you're under Spirit-led control. That's a nice hint about overcoming life patterns, by the way. So as she talked about kind of this mutual dependency in the house, I said, tell you what, our next freedom session, why don't you bring your mom and your daughter? She brought her mom, she brought her daughter, and for the next 45 minutes, I cast them out of each other. We didn't deal with any demonic spirits, and please don't get me wrong, I believe in dealing with the demonic. I believe it's a problem that we need to address and we need to know how to address. But in that period of time, what we did is we got them to look at each other and say, in a variety of different ways, I'm responsible for me, you're responsible for you, I won't carry your load, and you won't carry mine. And all 3 of them did that for each other, and you could actually see all of their postures kind of changing as they did that. And as they sat up straighter and kind of took a sense of self-responsibility, then we did a few freedomish kind of things, whatever that means to you, and sent them on their way. Now, one of the things I haven't told you about this lady is most of the time she would come to the classes once she could finally get out, and she'd come kind of really just worn. And what I mean by worn, she'd come just wearing whatever she could throw together, hair hanging down, no makeup on, and so by the time we cast them all out of each other and we did some things, said goodbye to them, and my deliverance guy was kind of looking, wondering what he'd just seen happen. A year later, I'm standing up front at the church, and some woman comes down to me. I don't recognize her. Wearing makeup, wearing professional clothes, and she begins to tell me, I'm doing great, I'm doing all this, I'm doing all this, and I said, would you tell me your name? Sometimes I just do that because I forget, but I didn't recognize her. When she told me her name, it was this lady from a year ago, and she'd moved from kind of this I can't leave the house to taking care of herself, working a professional job, standing up for herself, and all of her relationships getting healthier. And it was the move from dependence to independence that was a significant part of changing the overall pattern of her life. Listen very carefully. I'm going to name it now, and then we'll go into some of the big picture concepts, all right? What happened for all of them is they moved from an external locus of control, i.e. the world around me tells me who I am, to an internal locus of control, which is myself in partnership with God's Spirit, is the way that I know who I am and the way that I get my life accomplished. And that shift was a significant change in the entire pattern of her life. You'll see and hear that kind of echo throughout our time tonight. But part of why I want to start with those 2 stories is I want you guys to understand that there are elements of freedom that have to do with more than just confessing, renouncing, and breaking strongholds and inappropriate connections. Sometimes what has to happen is we have to make some shifts in the way that we believe about ourselves, and in particular, the way that we interact in the relationships in our lives. And if we don't make that shift, certain things may never change. Both the people I described, the young man and the young woman, the thing they struggled with was embedded in a pattern of relationships that had gone on their entire life. And until that pattern of relationships changed, the symptoms were never going to effectively be gone. That make sense? Mm-hmm. So let's talk about how that happens. Let me say, first of all, I mentioned early that often what happens is when I sit down with folks one-on-one, one of my first tasks is to kind of figure out what we're really dealing with, and then help them figure it out in a way that actually is something that can be solved instead of something that can't be solved. It's kind of unique being in a position where people pay money to help solve problems, because by the time they get to you, they have lots of attempts at solving their problem. That makes sense? And I'm going to say this, and this will make, again, sense as we talk through the concepts tonight. Many times, by the time they get to our place here, they're not dealing with a problem anymore. They're dealing with a variety of bad solutions to the problem they started with. The three women living in the household were all trying to fix each other, and they recognized that something was wrong, but their attempts to fix each other maintained a dependency that was a bigger problem than just the problems that they were trying to address about laundry and taking care of things in the house. The dependency could have continued on throughout all of their lives if they hadn't made a shift in that. And so helping them think not just about how can I get my mom to not do my laundry anymore. Some people are going, what? You want to do that? But in the meantime, thinking about more than just that, but recognizing that shift from the outside world controls me to me in partnership with the spirit inside of me runs my life is one of the biggest shifts you can make. But when I sit down with people and they're struggling with my relationship's not working, this is the third time I've lost a job, that one of my first questions is, especially if they're sitting and they haven't said it's my third time, they're just saying this is a problem I'm dealing with. Somewhere very early on I'm going to ask this question. Ever before in your life have you dealt with this? In fact, in particular, in marriage counseling, when an individual comes in and they're saying to me, this is what's not working in my marriage, in their mind, more often than not, what they're experiencing is the thing in front of me is broken. Can you help me fix the thing in front of me? And I start asking this question, ever before in your life have you experienced this? Sometimes I get this, well, only with my mother. Other times I get, well, no, I've never experienced this before in my life. And sometimes I have to probe a little bit to help them recognize that the vast majority of things that we struggle with are embedded in a lifelong pattern. I've heard a variety of different people say, God gives us tests that we will take again and again until we pass them. This is kind of like that in that we will repeat patterns. There are ways that our soul is built that makes us prone and likely to repeat patterns in our life until we don't. And the until we don't is what we're here to talk about tonight. Here's the number one thing I want you to do if you're looking at patterns in your own life. And by the way, if you're looking at patterns in someone else's life tonight, you can teach a great class, but that may be a pattern you need to overcome. Anyway, but if you want to start overcoming patterns in your life, the number one thing you need to do is begin to develop the ability to step back and then step back again and step back again and be able to start to see things in a much larger perspective. First of all, begin to see it outside of whatever the problem area that you've defined. Who else is involved? What other, how often does this repeat? What are the other factors that if I'm so close to this problem, I may not actually see it. If I step back a little bit and begin to step back and continue to step back, what will I begin to see about other people's involvement? And what will I begin to see about history? So there's two ways that I want you to think about stepping back. One of them is perspective. Be able to step back and recognize what other things, people, or circumstances are involved in the thing you're dealing with. One of the most common things that I see over the years, I've been doing this since 1991. Wow, that makes me sound super old. One of those common things I see is I end up sitting down in my office with the good kid in an addicted family. Let me draw this for you for a moment. So let's say that in an addicted family, the kind I'm referring to, this is dad, this is mom, and you've got 2 kids. And let's say that you've got a son and a daughter. It doesn't matter. Let's say that the daughter's addicted. If the daughter's addicted, which is what this indicates, over the years, everybody gets focused on this kid, and the whole family organizes around this, but there's a particular set of things that this person struggles with. And into their adult life, they end up coming in here and they report, you know what, here's what I experienced growing up. And part of what I want you to see is, if these people had been able to step back, one of the things they'd see is that everybody plays a part in this, not just the person who gets everybody's attention. One of my favorite and frustrating things about basketball. Anybody basketball people? Okay, I love basketball. I don't do it these days because my body won't let me very often, and so. But I used to love to watch it all the time. I just don't have that much time to do it. One of my favorite things about really good basketball players is they recognize that what's happening with the ball is the least of what's happening on the floor. But here's what happens. People who watch television see the guy with the ball, and so you see, I'm really showing my age here a little bit, you see Michael Jordan, and he's doing all this crazy stuff, and the next generation coming after Michael Jordan, they all want to be the next Michael Jordan. But when Michael Jordan was with the Chicago Bulls, there were 5 players in that team, not just one. And 4 of those players helped make possible what happened with him. And the recognition that, hey, there's somebody who's standing over there who didn't touch the ball for that entire play, which made it possible for 2 defenders to not be present where they would have been present otherwise. In other words, there's a bigger picture than just who's handling the ball, and there's a bigger picture than just who has the problem. In a family, when one person has the problem, the whole family has it. But unfortunately, what ends up happening is all of the attention goes here, just like a crosshair, and what I'm asking all of us to do is to be able to step back and say, who else is involved? If this is something that's happening in my life now, one of the ways I ask you to step back is perspective. The other way I ask you to step back is chronology, time. If you were to go back to your parents and your parents' parents and your parents' parents' parents, would you find that something similar to this has repeated through the generations? In fact, it's not unusual that when I do a genogram like this, wow, there's a big thing right there in the way. But when I do a genogram like this, we'll see almost what I call a checkerboard pattern, where you've got alternating, you've got the white and the black and the white, the black, the white, and the black, where you've got in a family system, you've got the people who are addicted, the people who are related to the people that are addicted, and then children who are addicted and people who help addicts, which is the term for that is codependence. And all up and down the system, you see everybody learns to play their role for generation after generation after generation. And until we can step back both in terms of perspective and in terms of chronology and really look at our personal experiences as a part of a much bigger whole, we're not going to be operating on some of the things that have the most power over us. Now, I'm going to very quickly talk about something that tonight's class is not about. When God gives Moses the 10 Commandments, one of the things he talks about is that the sins of the parents are visited onto their children and their children's children down to the 3rd and 4th generation. And so one of the things I want us all to understand is that God designed families to transmit stuff. If you continue to read that passage, by the way, it says the iniquities of the fathers are visited unto their children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. But it also goes on to say that the blessings are generated for thousands of generations. In other words, the family is a transmitting mechanism. And if we don't learn to stop the transmission process, then all of our families transmit whatever's in it. And here's part of the thing. You can only stop you from transmitting. You can't stop anyone else. That's another thing you should probably get free from. And so, look back in terms of perspective, but also back in terms of chronology, and learn to recognize that whatever it is you're dealing with isn't just a single behavior or a single relationship, but it's contained in a bigger picture, and it's contained in a historical picture. What I want to say about that is that when it comes to generational iniquity, what tonight's class is not about, but it's important to look at, is there's a spiritual element to this that says that the life that's passed down through families has a spiritual component to it, that when we pass down iniquities, it comes from father to children, from parents to children, and literally is passed down just like genetics. Tonight we're not talking about that, but that's important to deal with that, and there's some other great teaching on that. Tonight what we're really talking about is more what I call emotional DNA, relational DNA. How is it that our interactions pass from one generation to the next? More importantly, how can our interactions stop that? And so, first thing is step back. Step back in terms of perspective. Second thing is step back in terms of chronology. The next thing I would say is recognize this building block that I'm going to call circular causality. Circular causality is this. Let's say this is, I'm going to pick something different tonight just for creativeness sake. Let's say this is a father and a son. Okay? The father sees what the son's doing and wants it to change, and the son sees what the father's doing and wants it to change. And they both focus on the other, and in focusing on the other, they maintain this kind of crazy wheel that spins based on the momentum of not seeing themselves, but only seeing the other. And circular causality is sometimes, now listen, I want to be very careful about this. What I'm not trying to project is guilt and shame, but what I'm trying to do is hand people responsibility. Sometimes the very thing that most frustrates us about another person in a relationship may be something that we're creating by our behavior. And if we're not willing to do this, what's my part and what's my part, this cycle can go on for a generation and cause the next generation to do the same thing. At some point, the second perspective I would want you to have, besides stepping back both perspective and chronology, the second perspective I would want you to have is you can only be responsible for you. And your attempt to make other people different is often what maintains both the immediate patterns and the generational patterns. Does that make sense to everybody when I say it that way? The idea that you can make someone else be different keeps this destructive cycle going. And again, I picked father and son, but often what I tell people when they first show up for marriage counseling is, until I reverse this, until I get this to become this, I'm wasting time and they're wasting money. That makes sense? If they can both look at themselves, we're 50% of the way to change. As long as they keep looking at the other or the others, then what you'll find out is that is part of the energy that keeps the thing rolling. That makes sense? Fred, I'm glad you're here, man. Suddenly I heard an amen that was like louder than words could utter. So the next perspective that
I finally got through and done a little bit of it.
To recognize the idea of circular causality, and the solution to that is to step back and look at self. Now, having said all that, I'm going to make a shift, because what I want to talk about is, when we talk about overcoming patterns, I want us all to think in terms of that. Those are some of the perspectives I want you to have. But now I want you to think in terms of how a human soul is shaped. And what I mean by that is, we talked about how in the family with the addicted child, the unaddicted child can have just as much struggle, but in a different way. What happens to us is we end up in a family where each person's barriers or boundaries are connected to the other person's. That makes sense? So this is mom, dad, in my diagram before, addicted child, not addicted child. Notice that where mom has an innie, this one has an outie. Not the car, and not the navel, just metaphorically speaking. The ways that we fit together. So, have you noticed that in a, by the way, I'll say this later, that in a family, some people seem to take on responsibility, other people seem to shuck off responsibility. That's just one version of, this person gives responsibility away, this one takes it on. And so that issue of, it's just one way that people fit together, and both of them end up fitting. Each one has to adjust to the other, but there's a covert agreement, like I talked about earlier. That covert agreement is, here's how we fit together, and this one says, this one who's taking responsibility says, Johnny, if only you would pick up your mess, and then she goes and picks up his mess. And he says, if only you would stop nagging me, but he doesn't change his behavior. It's one of my favorite Dear Abbeys. I don't know if you remember that one, but remember the kid that wrote to Dear Abby, the teenager writes to Dear Abby and says, Dear Abby, my parents are super naggy. All day long they keep saying, pick up your stuff, clean your room, take care of your property, feed the dog. How can I get my parents to stop nagging me? And Dear Abby writes back and says, pick up your stuff, clean your room, feed the dog, take care of your stuff. It'll stop them from nagging you. It's that circular causality thing here, that they adapt to each other, and what they say with words doesn't matter near as much as what they do with behavior. And so the idea is that we all shape each other, and we all are shaped by each other. So I want to break that down into what that actually looks like relationally, but I want to take a moment to kind of illustrate that in a particular way. How many of you guys have read some stuff on birth order? Okay. I'm going to give you my amateur version of it. I've not actually read it. I am a child in a family. I have children who are all adults, so I don't know why I said it that way. But I've also done family therapy for far longer than I care to admit. And so let me just give you kind of my perspective on it. How many of you guys are oldest children? Now, sometimes, wow, most of you. Let me ask how many of you guys are middle children? And youngest children? Okay. So, what's that? Only children. Only children have the benefit of being all three of those, right? I don't know if you've seen the T-shirt, but the T-shirts say, "I'm the oldest child. I'm the one who keeps the rules." The middle one says, "Now I shouldn't have started with this. What? I'm the one who breaks the rules," and the youngest one says, "I'm the reason they make the rules." Right? So, but here's my take on birth order. Sometimes it works out really well that the oldest children tend to sit up closer. Not always, but so here's what happens. When you're an oldest child, there was a season of your life where you were an only child. That's one of the benefits and curses of being an oldest child, is however long that season was, whether it was 9 months, which happens, right? Whether you're an oldest child for 9 months or 9 years, for a season of your life, you're the only child until you get replaced. So one of the things that only youngest children don't experience is middle and oldest children eventually get replaced, right? So you're an only child till someone comes along and says, "I'm the next cute one." And listen to what happens. The oldest child becomes the most responsible child. And so typically, again, there's a lot of leeway. This is not law, this is just kind of my observations. Typically the oldest child is the one who's in a given setting. They're the one who's going to give instructions. They're the one who's going to solve the problems. They're the ones who are going to fix what's broken. They'll take charge in a small group. The oldest children are the ones, and by the way, what happens is they're prone to take responsibility for things they're not responsible for. So they often struggle with guilt about things they've never done. And maybe even guilt about what they wish somebody else hadn't done, but they didn't, because they feel responsible. Why? Because often what happens is mom and dad have found a third adult hand around, and so when their hands are full and they're like, "Hey Susie, can you change Fred's diapers?" And Susie goes and toddles over to the diaper, and she goes over and changes Fred's diaper. I'm sorry.
Right.
I didn't pick that on purpose.
Height needs to be changed anyway.
So that child becomes the next responsible one, and if the parents aren't cautious about it, they can even become what's called a parentified child, where they actually start to take the role of the parent more so than the adults do. But that oldest child can take on a sense of responsibility. Here's part of the key there. They feel most themselves when they are being responsible. Did I mention I'm a youngest child? I don't so much feel myself when I'm being responsible. But we'll get to youngest children in a minute. Middle children both didn't ever have the chance to be the only, and they got replaced, and so they're sandwiched in between the responsible one and the youngest, and in there they become what's sometimes called the lost child. Middle children are typically the quieter ones who find hobbies where they disappear behind closed doors, where they play quietly. They're the one who, in the addicted family, often the middle child is not the addicted one, because they're the one kind of, "I'll just be out of the way so that you can deal with that nasty one who's got the addiction. I'll just be the quiet good one that never causes a problem for you." But that, again, I'm generalizing a lot of things. If you're taking that on as a burden, just know this is a very general thing. The middle child, I didn't make one here, so maybe that's the middle child. The middle child is the one who doesn't have a specific distinction, and often because of that, kind of finds themselves not really having a sense of who they are based on the two roles of the oldest and the youngest. So they find who they are quietly by themselves. And as a result, they're the ones left in the grocery store. They're the ones left in the back seat of the car. They're whatever it might be. So I'm hoping it's youngest children or middle children who are smiling, but maybe it's middle children who are going, "I know, I hated that grocery store." Youngest children. Now I understand families have more than 3. Families can have 6 or 20 or 49 or whatever. But youngest children have the unique distinction of being what I call the last cute one. Did I mention I'm a youngest child? the last cute one learns that he or she can be most themselves when they make people laugh and kind of distract people from what's going on by being funny or goofy. They like a lot of attention, and here's the thing is they seldom really feel like they're responsible for things because the oldest child is going to make things work. They don't have to worry about it. So the youngest child isn't just the last cute one, but they're also the one who's kind of like, yeah, everything will be fine. The youngest child is the one kind of doing this along the edge of the Grand Canyon. Well, the oldest child is having a premature ulcer, right? And because the oldest child feels like they should keep the youngest child off the edge of the Grand Canyon or out of the 75-foot tree. So you see what happens there is birth order, listen very carefully, birth order tells people who they think they are, not who they are. You didn't come into the world with a sense of overdeveloped responsibility. You didn't come into the world with a sense of underdeveloped responsibility or a sense of invisibility. You came into the world ready to be interacted with. And the world and your family system started to tell you, how do you feel most yourself? Do you feel most yourself when you're taking charge? Do you feel most yourself when you're playing quietly by yourself? Do you feel most yourself when everyone's laughing at you? And out of that, we can develop, in some ways, a false sense of who we are. And so part of what I want you to catch is that life patterns has to do with we identify ourselves as a particular kind of person, and so we seek out these things. Now, I'm going to give you something I don't think I've ever done in this class before. I used to teach in the juvenile system a class called How to Create a Juvenile Delinquent. And when I do this, if you recognize yourself in here, this is a very major generalization. So don't walk out here and go, oh crud, I really screwed things up, or my parents really screwed things up. Just hear the principle. Here's what I want you to see. So let's say that you've got a marriage where they're already at odds with each other. And they, for whatever reasons, bring Johnny into the world. And Dad's frustrated with Johnny because he's taking time with the woman he's already having trouble with. And she connects to Johnny in ways that she's not connecting to her husband. And this is kind of a fairly common pattern with people who struggle. That the generations connect this way instead of this way. There's a reason we're supposed to leave our mom and dad and cleave to our spouse, because if you don't leave your parents emotionally, then you're not able to cleave to your spouse, and generation after generation doesn't find themselves able to connect rightly in marriage. So in this particular situation, I'm super oversimplifying and going really fast because this is not the main point. These are all building blocks. So what you see here is that this kid here develops two different ways of relating in his home. One of them is he smiles and looks at mom and he can have whatever he wants. These are such generalizations. Please just hear them as generalization. But he's, if he's in trouble, she comes in and says, oh, poor Johnny, let me take care of you so you don't get in trouble again. But over here, if he's in trouble, he doesn't come in and say, oh, poor Johnny. He comes in and gives discipline in whatever form that takes. And so in a system where this becomes really unhealthy, this can be highly conflictual. Well, this becomes over-engaged, enmeshed, whatever word you want to attach to that. And that continues to amplify the trouble between these two. Does that all make sense? All right, so here's what happens. This kid here is the same person from this puzzle that we looked at a minute ago. And so here's this kid right here. Got it? Mm-hmm. Now, Dad has interacted with him in one way, Mom has interacted with him in another way, and he leaves and he goes to school and he is shaped like this, even though he's not at home anymore. Does that make sense when I say that? Like you generalize over to the concept. In other words, the way that he's interacted with these two and the ways that they've interacted him have still shaped something about him. Now he goes to school, and at school, the school is kind of this loosely organized group of people whose job is to educate him. Or at one time it was. One person laughed, okay. I should never try that one again. So what happens is, in the system, you've got, let's say you've got the home ec teacher and the football coach, and the shop teacher and the English teacher, and you've got the vice principal with a big paddle on the wall, and you've got all these different people, and some of them tend to be like this, and some of them tend to be like this. Make sense? Now listen carefully. Johnny the delinquent, JD calls out to these people in particular ways. There is a part of him who's learned how to deal with an angry, punitive father, and so because of that, if he smells that in someone else, he provokes what he's always known. And they get into this circular thing that we talked about. At the same time, there's this part of him that knows how to make his mom kind of feel all mushy inside. And so if there's anyone in here who tends like, and I know, bad stereotyping, I apologize, but tends like, his English teacher's like, oh, Johnny's just this sensitive poet. You should read his writing. And the shop teacher's like, Johnny the delinquent? And what happens is, over time, he calls out to the people around him that are like these people, and he starts to create around him a dynamic that's similar to this, and these people, even in the break room, start to have conflict with each other because they disagree about Johnny.
He's recreated that.
And he has recreated in the world around him. Now, when I did this for a training for the juvenile justice system, I would actually show how the next step for this was when they were referred into the legal system, they'd create the same thing between social workers and policemen, between probation officers and detention officers. They'd create the same dynamic, and nothing ever gave them an opportunity to no longer be shaped like this. Let me tell you another true story. During the years I was teaching or working in that system, I did some consultation with a residential facility. Once again, kind of an amalgam of several stories, but a helpful one. There was a kid in there that just seemed to be like nobody could get him to be fixed. Like he was constantly in trouble, constantly causing chaos in the facility, constantly in trouble, and there was a trail of people who had either left their job or been fired because they were house parents in his home. And so I went there, and most people think, oh, Bob's going to fix this kid. And I started doing the thing I told you guys, step back, step back, step back, step back. And I looked, and what I began to see was, as I did a family interview, what I recognized was that years ago, let me do it the other way around. Which way should I do this? I'm going to erase the whole thing to do this. Years ago, his mom divorced his dad. And in the midst of that, he got put in this residential facility. And every time his mom would date, he would make sure that this person got fired. And she'd go find someone else and date, and he'd make sure he got fired. You understand what I mean when I say that? It's not a job, it's a dating relationship. And he made sure that he knew how to get that person out of her life. And after about the third time that she dated and he got that person fired, she said, I don't think I can have a life and a future with us living together. And she put him in this residential place, and he immediately proceeded to get house parents fired. He'd become an expert at playing people against each other in such a way that he could get rid of one of them. And I remember the day that we got everybody in on it. We got all the house parents, we got the administration, we got his mom, and we sat down and we just delivered the message clearly to him that nobody else will get fired from now on. We are all going to work together for his good, and he can just go ahead and be a kid again. And he went from being a 13-year-old age in a 22-year-old's mind to being an 8-year-old in a 13-year-old's body. In other words, at 13, he was so set his way of keeping everything the way he'd remembered all of his life that he had to kind of make himself harder and older than he was. And we watched him as we all just rearranged life around him. We watched him go back to being a kid again. Now, here's what I want you to see. All of this is to illustrate this point, that when we are formed, when a soul is formed, the reason that this happens is because you and I come into the world pretty much like clay. Now, I'm not completely a blank slate kind of guy because I had 4 kids and I watched them all come into the world. But I do understand that no matter what personality is born into somebody, you can begin to push their life around them in such a way They begin to believe things about themselves and believe things about family and believe things about life in general and begin to live as if their picture of reality is reality. Here's how that happens. They come into the world this way. If this is mom, they start out here. Literally, right? They are breathing her oxygen and eating her food, and her blood circulates through their blood. And they don't, this is a weird thought to have, but you must begin to have it if this is going to make sense. When they first come out and they're outside the mother's womb, this child doesn't have a real clear sense of who they are and who their mom is as separate beings. They're so accustomed to being attached to mom, biologically, emotionally, spiritually, in every way, that attachment is more than organic, more than biology. When they come out, they're like, did I mention I'm a grandfather, by the way? I've got this amazing grandchild. You ought to see the pictures that she posted the other day on our private side. The puppy's, the dog's tail fell on his head. Looks like he's wearing a big blonde wig. It's so cute. But, sorry. When that baby came into the world, he had been 9 months in his mother's womb. And when he came out, he was trying to figure out what it was like to be him, separate of being them. Now, he wasn't trying to figure out intellectually. He's just suddenly in a different state. And so here's what happens. How many of you guys know that I have a thing for laughing babies on YouTube, right? The thing about laughing babies on YouTube is nothing will make me laugh harder than a baby laughing. You know why that is? There's no filter. No filter. So when they laugh, it's like they could poop and pee at the same time. Whatever's in there, it might all come out. And so their laughter is just completely unhindered. We teach one another to be hindered. And we begin to compress the world around us to say, okay, when you come out, if you're uncomfortable, you cry. If you're tickled, you laugh. If you're mad, you scream. If you're hungry, you scream. If you're tired, you scream. When you come out, you're an uncontained mass of being. And that uncontainedness, the job of a family, whether they do it on purpose or not, is to begin to build a container around that mass of being, and in doing that, define for them who they are. And so we begin by deciding how we're going to interact with this baby. One of the things that I learned this year, and fascinating and a great year to have a grandchild, is that as the brain develops during the first 2 years of life, the right brain is developing, and the right brain is all about connection and attachment. At age 2, when language starts to develop, language, cognition, and the ability to analyze things develops in the left brain. And so the right brain is all about connection. My grandson Reese, I think he said my name. Nah. But I feel like he did, because I know he knows me. You know how I know he knows me? It's this. And it's what's happening without a word and without the ability to make a word. He's developing connection and attachment. And at age 2, he's going to say my name. Everyone's like, what's your grandpa name going to be? I don't know. Whatever he says, it's going to be my name. Unless it's weird, but as he starts to develop language and the ability to say dada and mama, and then dada, handsome, whatever it is, as he begins to develop those words, his left brain develops the ability to describe something that his right brain is experiencing. You hear me? So the way we're designed is our brain is made so that half of it is made to experience attachment and connection, half of it is designed to describe it and put cognition and analysis to it. If we get too far into this side of the brain, we may actually know things that we never experience. Just a thought. But here's my point, is that as I'm looking into Reese's eyes, there are things happening inside that little baby. Things happening inside of me. And the thing that's happening is he's learning how the world feels about him. And as his parents address his tears and his hunger and his needs, whatever they might be, diapers and stuff like that, as his parents address those things, they're telling him what it means when he's inconvenient. They're telling him how he needs to be to make them okay. You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
We don't say it on purpose. We would almost never. I mean, I've seen a few parents do this, but most parents are not going to look at their baby and say, I'm only going to be okay if you stop crying. But the message becomes clear depending on how we handle it. One of the joys of my life is watching as my kids interact with grandkids. And my son Atticus got married a while back, and he married a woman who's got 2 kids. So I actually now have 3 grandkids in that sense. And I watch them interact with those kids and let them know with their eyes and their face and their posture that those kids are valued. The words that come out are secondary. And what's happening is this child's sense of being, which actually starts out just like this, as the mom and the dad and other people begin to interact with them, they start to decide what makes them who they are. Does it make sense when I say that?
Blew my mind.
I'm trying to.
I like that.
We mirror back to them. Kids first know themselves in the mirror of their parents' eyes. And think about the weight of that for a minute, right? If we're so uncomfortable with us that all we can mirror back is fear, what does a child hear about themselves? If we're so short on strength that all we can mirror back is anger, what does that tell a child about himself? But every time the humans in their existence do this, we mirror back to them who they are. Listen, I don't know if this is familiar to all of you, but years ago I wrote a story about an acrobat. And if it's not familiar, there are free ways to get that, or you can buy my green book, and it's in there. There's, like I said, there are free ways to do that. You can go on my website and just listen to the audio version of it. There's a video on Vimeo called The Kingdom Parable if you want to hear the story. But the basic idea of the story is the child of 2 great acrobats is lost and found by farmers and raised on a farm. And this is what that's about. Here's a child who contains inside of himself the ability to defy gravity, to stand above the instruments of what he uses as an acrobat. And instead he's trained for a lifetime, he's viewed for a lifetime, he's treated for a lifetime, he's interacted with for a lifetime, as if he's supposed to keep his eyes on the ground and his hand to the plow. And somewhere in his later years of life, the acrobats come back and find him. And this story is what this is about. This baby, completely unformed in its impulse, but true to who he was in God's image, is interacted with and raised by farmers. There are ways that he's told something that's completely untrue about who he is. Not told with words, told with conduct and attitude and emotion and our ability to be able to look at somebody clear of our own junk. Now, the reason this is everybody's story is every baby delivered into the families in this room and watching on Facebook, every baby delivered into these settings doesn't come from you. They come from somewhere else, and they have a higher destiny, they have a higher image imprinted in them. They have a higher sense of identity than just the children of the humans they're born to. And yet here we are in all of our weakness raising them. Here we are in all of our struggles trying to figure out how to give direction in life and correction in life and affection in life, how to give those things in such a way to try to mirror back to a child something that we sometimes struggle to wonder if it's even in us. And in that setting, we form those puzzle pieces that I talked about, where we all start to fit together. And if this person has too much anger, then the child develops a sense of what do I need to do to manage anger. If this person's too insecure, this person develops a sense of how do I make this person feel better about themselves. If this person has too much addiction, this person says, how do I live in such a way that my parents don't have the same problem with me that they had with them? And on and on and on. As we grow, we find ourselves in relationships that tell us who we are, and more often than not, it tells us the wrong thing. It tells us we're somebody that we're not. And somewhere along the line, we have the opportunity to find our real Father and let Him begin to tell us what we could have known our whole lives if we had been raised by our real Father. But I don't know anyone, I've heard stories of people raised by wolves, but I've never heard anyone raised by God Himself. I know some of our parents may say your parents are close. By the way, I don't know if you know this. Back when I used to teach this in freedom training, we always did the section on dealing with demons, and then we did the section on families, and I will say, not everyone has demons, but everybody has families. And the thing you have to know is that everybody's family is normal until you leave it. And leaving your family is the first step towards breaking life patterns. And when I say leaving your family, I don't mean never talking to them again. I mean beginning to realize that you can draw these lines not based on how your life has been mirrored to you by the humans around you, but rather based on your connection to God and who and what He's put inside of you. As you begin to realize that what's inside of you can tell you who you are, as you're born again and the Spirit of God dwells inside of you, what's inside of you can tell you who you are, and you can begin to, if this has kind of taken over a part of you, you can begin to push that back out and say, wait a minute, what if that's not me? I'm a youngest child, but I also have a fairly strong sense of responsibility. And so I like to think that there are some ways that I've not been fully shaped by my birth order. There's ways I've had to say, wait a minute, that's not who I am. There's some things that are true about me that don't feel true about me yet. And our willingness to push against those things and begin to say, what if what's been mirrored back to me in my lifetime isn't who I am, is one of the most important parts of breaking this pattern. Family therapy calls that individuation. It's the act of breaking ties with family or breaking your connection with family that used to define you so you can move from dependent to independent. It doesn't mean not having a relationship with family. It means changing your relationship with family so you're no longer dependent and not based on insurance and law, but based on, have I learned to become my source connected to God as source instead of letting other people's opinions, other people's thoughts, other people's views of me. If those things tell me who I am, then I'm still a dependent. And those are the life patterns that we're here to talk about. So this is at the root of all why this happens. Now, here's what I want to talk about for a couple minutes. And the funniest thing happened to me. If you guys have heard me teach this class before, I'm about to talk about a particular menu item at a particular restaurant as a way of telling the story. And so the other day, I had the funniest thing happen. I was meeting with some people. I know one of them, the other person I met for the first time. I went to have a conversation that I didn't know if it would have any meaning for me or not. I just felt like the Lord wanted me to have this conversation. These are people that have a ministry and were wanting to talk about board activity with this ministry, so I went to meet them. We went to the restaurant that I'm about to talk to you about. And I'm about to talk to you about a menu item that we didn't order, but somebody delivered one to our table. And this will make more sense in a minute. So I'm going to talk to you about Chili's Southwest egg rolls. And I've told this story for probably 8 years now. We're sitting in Chili's over here on 114. We've ordered healthy, salad and junk. And the guy comes up and says, here's your appetizer, and sets down a plate full of Southwest egg rolls. And I'm like, I look at Polly. Polly looks at me, and she's heard me tell the story. They're sitting across the table, and it's like, we didn't order that. My first instinct, I looked around the restaurant and going, okay, who sent the freaking egg rolls to my table? And if you're out there, please let me know that you did. But the guy was like, it's a mistake, sorry, but you can have them. And I looked at these people, I said, I'm sorry, but I'm looking around to see who sent these because these things have meaning. They're like, what's the meaning? So I told them what I'm about to tell you guys. I was trying to figure out how to work that story because it's so funny. To talk about how we repeat patterns in life, I want to talk about attraction. Now, I'm going to talk about it from the perspective of romantic attraction, but I want to put it in the more general context of building relationships. Because when I talk about this, I'm going to use the concept of husband and wife or man and woman being attracted to each other, but I want you to recognize that this can happen with friendships. I want you to recognize that this can happen with jobs and churches. Places that we're drawn to, we find, here's the thing, because of the way we got shaped, we find ourselves going back to places that are shaped like the thing that fits. And I want to talk to you about the mechanisms of that so we can begin to recognize what has to be changed in us to stop repeating these patterns. So though I'm going to talk about man-woman attraction, I want you to hear I'm talking about human connection and why sometimes we're drawn to people who just seem to be the same kind of person over and over again. My early years as a counselor, I remember working with a young woman in her late teens, maybe early 20s, and her dad was an alcoholic and she was dating an alcoholic. Coincidence? Or not. So as she's dating this alcoholic, she comes to me for counseling, and I'm like, my job is to break her up with this dude. Now, she wasn't asking for that. And so I quickly realized that was not my job. My job was to bring her to a fuller sense of who she was. And as she came to a stronger and fuller sense of who she was, she broke up with him. Okay, she breaks up with him, and after 4 years of abuse and unfaithfulness from a high school relationship, she's finally, she's gotten healthier enough to break up with him. And she takes a new job so that she's kind of away from him. And she comes in about 2-3 weeks later. She says, "Man, I'm loving the singleness." She said, "There's a couple guys at work that already kind of paying attention to me." And I was like, "Oh, really? It's a little soon for that." She said, "I know, but I'm young." And she says, "There's one guy. He's super nice to me, treats me with respect and dignity, opens doors for me, brings me gifts, does all this kind of stuff." And she goes, "I just don't really feel anything for him." And I watch her eyes shift, and she goes, "But there's this one guy. He's kind of a dangerous guy." And you can see everything about her shifts because she's got that kind of thing, right? She's like feeling the sense of attraction, and that's what I'm after. Is that attraction is the thing that makes you connect to other people. I'm putting it in terms of masculine and feminine attraction, but think of it as friendships. If you've got friendship patterns that repeat over time, put this in that. If you've taken job settings where again and again in the job, this is what happens to you. If you've been in a series of different churches where you've had the same experience, put this into that hopper with me, okay? So here's what happens. Attraction is a deficit-based experience. I know, sounds so negative, right? How many of you guys remember Sleepless in Seattle when they talked about, attraction is just one neurosis being attracted to another neurosis? I'm not quite that negative, but I'm pretty darn close. But here's what I want you to hear. Attraction is a deficit-based experience in the same way that hunger and thirst are. Speaking of which, what did I do with my water? Pam, would you get me that water bottle right there? I can already tell I'm going to run out of juice before I'm done. So thirst is a deficit-based experience. My mouth is getting dry, my throat's getting dry. Because I'm running out of something, I desire something. And attraction is the same thing. We are attracted to something because we have a deficit. That deficit's better. Now, I don't think that means a negative thing. I just think it sets us up for a potential negative thing. I actually think there's a very redemptive design about this, which we'll talk about towards the end of this piece. But what I want you to catch in this is that even before there was a need for redemption, in other words, in the wholeness of man before the fall, I think attraction was still about we have a way that we feed each other's weaknesses. A helper suitable to our needs means that we can fit into each other's weak spots. And so even in the pre-unredeemed state of man, I think it was still a deficit-based experience. Man before the fall still got hungry. Man before the fall still got thirsty. We had needs. The question is, what do we understand about fulfilling those needs? So here's what happens. Now, you've heard it said, I feel like Jesus when I said, you have heard it said this, but I say unto you this, right? You've heard it said that you'll be attracted to somebody who's just like your opposite sex parent. So you would be attracted to someone who's just like your mom. You would be attracted to someone who's just like your dad. So you've probably heard something like that, right? I'm going to say it's actually worse than that. That may not be bad in your world. Maybe you don't think of it as bad, but it's actually, the thing you've got to recognize is this. You will be most attracted to someone who's like the parent you have yet to resolve your differences with. What's that?
So that's jacked up.
Right? He said, in case you didn't hear, he said, that's jacked up. Because attraction is a deficit-based experience, we will be most attracted to someone who's like the parent we have least resolved our differences with. I know. This is the bad news, good news moment. But the good news is there's a reason for it that I want you to hear by the time we're all done. But I want you to catch that. The reason for that is because you get another chance to resolve your differences. Now, let me describe Southwest egg rolls, and then I'll make a drawing for you, and we'll talk about the redemptive piece of this. So, it wouldn't make sense, would it, that we're attracted to somebody who's like someone who's hurt us, or we're attracted to somebody who's like somebody who did something that left us with a wound or a deficit. Let me make it make sense to you in a way that I think will be helpful, and then we'll do kind of the concept on the board. So, now that you know, I am a big fan of chili Southwest egg rolls. If you haven't had them, you probably should. Just one at a time, because they're probably not very healthy. They're fried and all that good stuff. But so I'm consulting in Kerrville, Texas, at a time before the Chili's was built there. So I don't know if you've been to Kerrville lately. There's been a Chili's there for at least the last 15 years. 15 years ago, I'm consulting there, and I go there 2 or 3 days at a time. And I would say to them, "Man, they're building a Chili's downtown. As soon as that thing is done, you've got to try their Southwest egg rolls." So month after month after month, I'd come and I'd say, "They're building a Chili's when that thing's done. We're all going to go there. You've got to try these." So the day that I show up, the Chili's is built, right? I spend the morning doing my consultation, but really what I'm doing is I'm going, "Southwest egg rolls. Man, they're delicious and they're crunchy and there's lots of great flavor. You dip them in avocados or you dip them in, the different flavored ranch dressings, and I'm making everybody salivate, or at least making me salivate." And so I spend the first 3 mornings teaching them about the juvenile system, but really what I'm teaching them is about Southwest egg rolls. So lunchtime comes, we have an hour to go get lunch and come back, and we go down. Grand opening, the line is about 6 hours long. Small Texas town, brand new restaurant. There is no way that we're going to have Southwest egg rolls that day. So we go ahead and have like steak or something. But listen, we were all disappointed by Chili's. When I went back home, do you know where I went? Chili's. Why? Because I wanted to go to the place that had let me down to get the thing I hadn't gotten from them before. Our appetite isn't just to have our need responded to, but to have our need responded to by the kind of person who wouldn't do it before. The young woman I talked about. This guy who's kind and sweet to her. There's no big conquest. There's no change if a nice person is nice to her. Well, what if she could get an addict to be nice to her? Could it possibly repair the wounds of her childhood? It looks like this. At the conscious level, we see some things, and at the unconscious level, there are some things we don't see. That's part of what defines them as conscious and unconscious, right? And so at the conscious level, we might see some behaviors like this person drinks, and this person, maybe screams and yells a lot. And as we see those things, someone raised in that household, a little girl raised in that household, may look at the drinking and may look at the behavior. That's a person, and that's a young person. I know, don't let my artwork distract you. I know it's pretty amazing. So what she sees with her eyes is not what's really going on, because we understand that below the surface, he's drinking and he yells because there's some pain here, and because there's some fear here, and because there's some rage here. Not rage. Road rage. So as she looks at those things, consciously she's making a decision to herself, and here's what she says: "I will never, ever find someone who drinks and never find someone who cusses." You hear who she's looking for? She's looking for an evangelical. Sorry. So many jokes just went through my mind. I didn't say most of them. What she doesn't know is that she's not just seeing things with her eyes. She's receiving things. And that way we talked about what's mirrored back to her. And her soul has been shaped by his pain, his fear, and his rage to be the kind of person who makes a perfect fit with that. Her puzzle piece develops an appetite for that puzzle piece. So she grows up, she turns, she heads this direction, she's now older, and she's searching the world over. Sounds like there's a song in there too, doesn't it? I search the world over. She doesn't realize, because she's looking at a conscious level, And she's saying the same things we all say. I'll never make my parents' mistake. I will never marry an alcoholic. I will never. And we're trying to do with a conscious mind, we're trying to make a decision that will somehow override what the Bible says, which is, as a man believes in his heart, so is he. It doesn't say as he cognates in his brain. It says as he believes in his heart. Because this stuff is all taking place in the place that Jeremiah says is hidden. And so she's got her response to pain and fear and rage. And so who is she going to be drawn to? Probably shouldn't have done this, but it's too late. She finds her nice evangelical. That's a Bible. And he doesn't drink and he doesn't cuss in public.
Oh.
Dang, it's quiet. Amy's laughing, just not out loud. So she sees at the conscious level, here's somebody, listen very carefully, this is one of the very important things about understanding life patterns. She sees somebody who on the conscious level appears to be the exact opposite. The question is not, is the behavior the opposite, but is the emotional profile different? Because direct 180-degree opposite behavior often has the same root. Quick story. This, by the way, is a longer class than usual. You guys all right?
Yeah.
I'll still be done by 15. All right? Okay. Now I lost where I was.
Same pattern underneath.
Oh, same pattern. Sorry. So another amalgam of families I've dealt with for years and years, somewhere in a galaxy far, far away. I talked to a mother one time who said, "Look, I'm very hands off with my kids." I'm like, "Really? Why?" She said, "Well, because my mom was super controlling." She said, "My mom was controlling because she was afraid that we would all be promiscuous. And so in her fear, she was so controlling that we all went behind her back and we were promiscuous. So I'm very hands off because I'm afraid my kids will be promiscuous." Now listen, the two opposite behaviors both have the root of fear. And it's the root that's passed on, not the behavior. It's this that's passed on, not the behavior. Fear in parenting, fear in relationship, can never produce results that love can produce. That make sense?
Yeah.
Fear in that particular story produced two opposite behaviors in parenting, but in both cases it produced the root of the fruit of the root of fear. Because fear begets fear, begets fear, begets fear. So she comes and she finds her nice evangelical who doesn't do this stuff in public, but what she begins to discover is in his pain and in his fear and in his rage, he's found religion and compulsivity to be his addiction. He works 90 hours a week and spends the rest of his time volunteering at church. And while that might sound like a diligent man, there's a difference between diligence and compulsivity. Diligence is I do what's important. Compulsivity is I can't stop myself. And she finds somebody, though he doesn't drink and he doesn't cuss in public, he has enough pain and fear and rage that in his religious control and in his rigidity about work and his compulsivity about relationship, he's just as much projecting the pain and fear as this one is. She's drawn because this fits this, and the attraction process. Listen, if you're in that process yourself, or already in a relationship, or already married, one of the things that I always ask couples about their marriage is, I ask, were you attracted to each other? Not everyone was. It may seem strange to you, but I've done enough premarital counseling, marital counseling, postmarital counseling, and non-marital counseling to know that some people marry for reasons other than attraction. But I actually think God designed attraction to be the thing that drives us. I think God designed attraction to be what draws us to Him. We just don't always present Him as attractive, right? Instead, we present Him as compulsive, but that may be more about us than about Him. So, attraction is this kind of chemical thing that says, when I'm near you, I feel something that I don't feel near other people. And that attraction is simply this. It means we fit. Here's a test. If in the early stages of your relationship you say things to each other like this, it feels like we've known each other a lot longer than we actually do. And the fact is, you actually have. Right? This fits because you've known this your whole life. Now listen, this is not God's trick to make us all miserable.
Are you sure?
Now, everyone in the room understands why it looks like it. Right? It's a trap. Or it's the Red Sea. Because the Red Sea was a trap until it parted. And when the trap parted, and you begin to see that supernatural intervention can make something that looks like a trap become your pathway out of bondage, it's a whole different way of viewing it. I want to give you a different way of viewing it. As these two people draw close to each other, remember I said friendships, jobs, churches, community, whatever it is, wherever you connect, these things happen. One of the things I've watched over the years is a lot of times, have you ever noticed that it's hard to have couple friends? Right? You know, if the wife is good friends with one, the husband may not be great friends with the other. And it's like, if you find two really great couples that really, they all four click with each other, it's because the husband is like the wife of one and the wife is like the husband of the other. And you've got this kind of thing going on. It's like, oh. So, you know, I've heard different people say, she's just like my husband. Well, it's because the attraction process works in all of our relationships. There's someone you click with them because some level this is happening. And one of my fears for our culture today is we so run from honest relationships, we miss the opportunity for the Red Sea to part and our soul to be healed in relationship. We so run from honesty with each other and vulnerability with each other and the willingness to commit to each other in real friendships that we really miss the chance to be I'm missing a word, transformed. That's not the word I'm looking for. Sanctified. We miss the chance to be sanctified because sometimes your sanctification is more of this, not less of this. Jimmy Evans, he's got a knack for for like super one-liner kind of clever things. Jimmy Evans says that God designed marriage so that jerks can't be happy. Nervous laughter, nervous laughter, nervous laughter. And the idea is if you keep doing this and you're selfish, at some point it's going to be painful to stay selfish when you draw into intimacy. At some point, for you to make demands for your rights, your relationship will not be a happy place to be. But when you learn what it means to come together in connection and intimacy, not only do you become less of a jerk, but you have an opportunity for some healing in some places. Here's what happens. As these two draw close together, what happens is it's like, oh, dang, that hurt. Oh, dang, that hurt. Oh, dang. And so what happens is, and here's what it sounds like in conversation. You're just like my mother. Right?
Yeah.
And what happens is we start to feel something we have felt our whole life. But if we do this, circular causality, we go, it's your fault, I wish you would stop it. Instead of going, why does that hurt me? What is it about that bruises my soul? What is it about that causes pain to me? As long as we go, you need to stop doing that to me, we're completely not self-examining. The minute I go, what meaneth this? What is this? It's like this. If you have a bruise on your foot and you step on the floor, are you going to get mad at the floor?
No.
Well, some people do. But it's the same thing. If you have a bruise in your soul and something bumps up against it, don't get mad at the thing that bumped up against it. Ask about the bruise. And as people do this, without a word, the question is being asked, what hurts inside of you? And here's the big if both people are submitted to and inhabited to and willing to receive, contain, and broadcast the breath of God, then these two people come together and they actually contain something in their soul that's medicine. And listen to Ephesians 5, if we submit to one another in love instead of blame each other in pain, if we surrender to each other in love, we find that as we move closer and stay honest and vulnerable and surrendered to the Spirit moving through us, then the Spirit moving through us can find access to that person that they could not have found separate of that relationship. Some of these wounds are deep enough that you won't find it without connected, intimate relationships. Some of the things that God wants to get at in your life aren't going to change just by you being yourself. Can you worship God out in the field? Of course. Can you become fully who you are, isolated? Absolutely not. Bless you. The trick is that as we come together, instead of why are you doing that to me, if both can be surrendered to each other and submitted to the presence and the Spirit of God, what happens is we draw close to each other and we're able to look and say, hey, that really hurt. Would you partner with me to learn what that is and learn how we can grow together to where it doesn't happen again? It might be mine. I'm not asking you to change. I'm asking you to partner with me while I learn how to change. You hear it? In this thing about overcoming life patterns, you never get away from the idea that as long as you're working on you, as long as you're becoming the you that you're created to be, it will change the patterns of your life. Let me give you one last piece of this. I told you we'd be done by 8:15. This to me is one of the most helpful and sometimes a bit humorous pieces of changing life patterns. Because all of this shaping of who we are, the longer we live and the more life we live and the more relationships that we succeed and fail at, the more we realize that all of this stuff takes place in communication. We sit in front of each other and we say things or we don't say things, and our conduct says things or it doesn't say things. And in those places we're disappointed and we're abandoned and we're hurt. And if we can stay in those places and learn how to do that in a way that's functional and healthy, we make each other better. If we run from those things or hide from those things, we all kind of stay isolated and rot inside. Wow, that was kind of dramatic, wasn't it? Sorry. But I see it happen. So this exchange, and I'm going to illustrate it one particular way, and then teach us one last thing about overcoming patterns. One of the things I've observed over time, and I'm going to talk about an addict and a codependent. Again, very, very stereotypical, but it helps illustrate a concept in life patterns that I think is crucial. One of the things I've seen is that addicts tend to live their life full of this pain that they haven't dealt with, and they push it down through their addiction. Codependents look to fix things and fix things and fix things. And there's a covert agreement between these two that I'm going to give you my good stuff and I'll carry your bad stuff for you. Now, that's not just between addicts and codependents, because I don't like either of those words, actually. It's the ways that we as humans learn to connect to each other is, listen, there's a reason I'm a licensed counselor and was the freedom guy for 10 years at a big church and was a licensed counselor for 15 years before that, is because in my family, I was the one who carried some stuff. And I learned to carry stuff for the families I was in. And over the years, I've had to learn what's mine to carry and what's not mine to carry. Because if I carried everything in all the situations I described to you, I'd be about an inch tall and, 6 feet wide. I feel like, something from the Roadrunner. There's no way to stand up under the weight of that. We've got to learn how to say, this isn't mine. I'm not going to run away from you, but this isn't mine. This is yours. Let's live together deciding what's yours to carry and what's not yours to carry. But in these unhealthy relationships, what happens is, just like I described, that one person tends to carry responsibility and the other person tends to give away responsibility. It's the same thing whether it's an active addiction or not.
No accountability. No accountability.
No accountability?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, it's like one person takes all accountability. I'll be responsible for everybody, and other people take no accountability. And so what ends up happening in that is this person takes all the negatives, and this person either gives away or this person takes all the positives. And here's what that sounds like. If only you wouldn't do this, then I wouldn't behave so badly. If you would stop yelling at me, I would stop drinking. If you would stop drinking, I'd stop yelling at you. And it's back to that idea of circular causality. This agreement, this handing off the pluses and the minuses, happens when two people live in a relationship where they've covertly agreed, they've contracted together to say, I'm going to carry your weight, and I'm going to give you my benefits, but it's only a one-way exchange. In a healthy relationship, it's a two-way exchange. And the deciding factor in this, I'm going to talk about how to do this communicationally. The deciding factor in this is, listen, we are called to bear one another's burdens, but Lenny, your burdens are the things that you can't carry alone. So other people should help bear your burdens. But there are things that not only can you, but you should. There are things that you alone are responsible for. That doesn't mean you have to do them alone. That just means if someone else does them for you, you're becoming less yourself and not more yourself. So the deciding factor needs to be, when we bear one another's burdens, are we actually bearing each other's burdens, or are we carrying something that we're not supposed to carry? Are we giving someone else a pass and therefore keeping them immature? So, the exchange here happens back and forth between these permeable boundaries. Remember, here's the little baby that was born, and the whole world mirrored back to both of them who they were. And this person learned that it was their job to give their burdens away. This person learned that it was their job to carry everybody's burdens. There's a partnership made in a bad place. How does this look in communication? Well, let's talk about that for a second. This is one of my favorite things and most important things to talk about, because this is something all of you do every day, and the ways that you do it and your intentionality about it and your skill in doing this can have everything to do with how satisfying your life is and how healthy your relationships are. I want to talk about communication, and I want to talk about it in a particular way. I want to talk about the ability to set boundaries and learn how to say, I'll be responsible for me if you'll be responsible for you, in a way that has the ability to preserve relationships. And I need more of this. I'm having a deficit again. Communication, the topic of my next book, isn't just an exchange between two people of ideas. It's an exchange between two people. You know, Will, one of the things I like about you, you come and you ask questions about our relationship. And I appreciate that, because you're not just exchanging a thought. You're saying, what's true about our friendship?
I just want to find where we are and where we're at, because I love you.
We all do. We all want to do that. The problem is we don't all do that on purpose. In fact, sometimes we do it in some pretty bizarre ways. So I appreciate your directness. If you want, this is the thing I said 40 minutes ago. I'll remember this in a couple minutes. We'll put this on the Think Differently Facebook page. We've put it there a few different times, but one of my favorite videos of the year is How Enlightened Families Argue. And what I'm about to talk about would be like a family therapist's dream if that video actually happened. It's what I just had a conversation I just had with Will. Wouldn't it be nice if we just did this stuff on purpose instead of the ways that most of us do it? We all want to know where we are with each other. We all want to know, do you like me? Do you reject me? Do you admire me? Do you think I'm valuable? Do you think I'm pretty? Do you think I'm funny? We all want to know that stuff. But usually we have ways. We don't just say, how do you feel about me? We have ways. And so it works like this. All communication has an overt level and a covert level. The overt level is the data, or the language. The covert level is everything else.
Subliminally?
So it's the implications and the inferences, and that's all I'm going to say for now, because there's a lot more and I don't want to go too deep with that. The implications and inferences are like this. Can we play a little game, Kathy? I look at Kathy and I go, really like your hair. Now, what did I just say to Kathy? Up here I said one thing. Down here I tried to say a completely different thing with everything else. Tone of voice, eye contact, posture, all that. Because I know Kathy and I actually love your hair. I always have. But, so I knew I could do that with you. But the whole point is, what you say with your words doesn't necessarily line up with what you're actually saying.
Oh. Subliminally, he meant something else.
Body language, tone of voice, every other. So experts say that the words are about 5 to 8% of your communication. The rest of your communication is this down here. Now here's the dilemma. Another way to describe this, what's that? Oh, I thought so. Another way to describe this is the information level and this is the relationship level. Now, let me put some meat to those bones. My oldest son has Down syndrome. Hi, Ian. I did it. Sorry, Narisha. I did it again. And so it's always been his job to take out the trash. So let me describe an exchange that used to be fairly common. I would look at him and say, the trash is full. Now, what did I just say? Most of you who have children are saying you just told him to take the trash out, but not at this level. I didn't. All I did is made an observation about the capacity of the trash can. Okay, I said the trash is full. Now we all understand that the implication is take out the trash, but I didn't actually say take out the trash unless you heard what I wasn't saying, and most of you did. So he would look back at me. I would say he didn't have a skirt on. I would say the trash is full. He would look back at me and say, "You're right, it is." Now, what just happened is this. At this level, he's agreed with me. At this level, he's just dug his feet in. Right? At this level, he's simply said, what you said is correct. But his failure to get up, go to the trash can, and do anything about it is saying, what are you going to do about it, Dad? My job is to make sure that the words I'm saying line up with the implications I'm trying to send so that my communication is clear and as healthy as can be. The way that negatives are slid over to you and your positives are given away is when people operate at this level incongruent with this level. And I look at Kathy and I say, "Oh, your hair looks really great today." And she goes, "Thanks," because she feels slimed when she's just received, quote unquote, a compliment. And so that exchange of the positives and the minuses took place, if we didn't have such a great friendship, it just took place between us when I did that, because she took my negativity into herself, and I've relieved myself of it by whatever benefit I get from insulting her. That exchange happens at this level, and most of the time it often happens when at this level you're saying something completely different than you're saying down here. But what you're saying down here is, here, take my junk. Now let me teach you how to go wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. The formula is simple. Take the covert, make it overt, and give it back to them in the form of a question. Take the covert, make it overt, and give it back in the form of a question. Because the key to this whole boundary setting thing is responsibility. Right? Remember what I'm saying is, I'm responsible for me, you're responsible for you. And the question is your way of saying back to them, hey, I don't feel responsible for what you just said to me, but I'm going to let you take responsibility. So let's play Kathy. Do you know how to do it, or you want me to do it for you?
You better do it.
Okay, so I say to Kathy what I said a couple minutes ago. You're all this kind of negativity. I say, geez, your hair really looks great. And she looks back at me and she says, it sounds like you don't like my hair. Is that what you're saying to me? She's just taken this, she's put it up here, and she's handed it back to me in the form of a question that makes me responsible to answer her now. If she just says, sounds like you don't like it, I can go, but I do. And she'll go, but you don't. But if she says, it sounds like you don't, is that what you're saying? I have to go, oh no, that's not what I'm saying. And she'll go, okay. If I say, I've lost track of what I said. If you ask me that question, I say, no, I do like it. I've just had to be direct with you. If I say I don't like it, anyway, whatever happens, she hands me the question. I told you I was done at 8:15. Whether I'm done teaching or not, I'm clearly done. The question makes me responsible to be honest or to lie directly. When I say back to her, when she says back to me, that sounds like this, is that what you're saying? I have to either say to her, yeah, that's what I'm saying, and own my junk, or I have to say, no, I'm not saying that. And now she's just successfully said, wax off, and I'm like, dang, she didn't take it. I handed her the medicine with a spoonful of sugar, and she handed me the whole spoonful right back. Boundary setting communication. I'm going to give you one other quick one, and this is why I looked at Amy and smiled a couple minutes ago. Boundary setting communication at its kind of most formulaic level is this. Part of what you're trying to say is, I'm not taking that on. Whatever you're not saying to me, I'm not going to take the weight of assuming your communication. If you can't be clear with me, I'm not going to assume the responsibility to sort it out. Does that make sense? So let me give you a shortcut to that. So now I'm going to walk up to Kathy, and I'm going to try to get her to carry my pain. You ever know someone who does that? And part of that exchange, the positives and the minuses. I've got all these minuses here, and Kathy's sunshine and just all happy and full of joy, and I walk up to her and go, man, I used to be happy. Must be nice. Now, she could like come underneath the weight of that and go, oh, what's wrong? And next thing you know, I'm like, well, so I don't have any money, I don't have any food. I'm like, I'm not just telling her information. All of my nonverbals are going, hey, would you carry the weight of this? Hey, would you carry the weight of this? Hey, would you carry the weight of this? And she can look at me if she wants to avoid the whole formula. She can, with a single word. This is an advanced skill, by the way. With a single word, she can still wax off. She looks at me and goes, "Oh, bummer." I hope you figure out a solution to that. You hear what happened with that word. Now listen, I'm not talking about someone you legitimately can help and should help. I'm talking about someone who's trying to hand you their negatives. Overcoming patterns is not about you getting everybody else to change the way that they live, but about you starting to go, wait a minute, I'm going to look at a bigger perspective than just the problem in front of me. I'm going to think not only about what's in front of me, but the bigger perspective and chronologically different. I'm going to start thinking I might actually be a participant in this thing. So that means if I change me, I can change the whole thing. And the way I'm going to change me is I'm going to stop letting the world tell me who I am. I'm going to start letting my connection to my source, to God himself, tell me who I am. And the things that he's put inside of me will help him tell me who I am. And as I do that, I'm not going to fight the rest of the world. I'm just going to wax on, wax off. I want to become me. And I don't want to become me by carrying your stuff. I want to become me by walking alongside of you. Well, you take care of you and I take care of me. And we agree what's your responsibility and we agree what's my responsibility. Overcoming life patterns, well, there's a ton of the freedom journey where you're healing, your restoration, you're breaking strongholds, all those different things, and your inward healing is a part of that. Your relationships are also a significant part of that. And you might have all the inward healing in the world, but not learn how to keep other people from pouring stuff back in. And until you learn to wax on, wax off in a loving, kind way, you'll find that the patterns of your life reproduce. Let's pray and we're done. Jesus, we believe you didn't just come to restore our factory condition and settings, but you came to bring us to wholeness and maturity, and to bring us to healthy identity and relationships. As we learn to receive from you and recognize how the world has reflected to us who we think we are, teach us how to show the world a different reflection and reflect back to them who you've told us we are. Give us both the eyes to see and the courage to risk. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Thank you guys for being here.